Hello and welcome to a new episode of MTG CubeTube. My name is Sjoerd and I think Cube is the best Magic format. This video will be all about building your very own cube from scratch. There is a lot of ground to cover, so let's head right in. When you start your own cube, you basically have two choices. Either you copy a list you find on the internet or you build one from scratch. Copying a cube list from the internet is definitely the easiest. You just take one of the most drafted cubes on cubetutor.com or maybe the most recent list from one of the Magic Online cubes and you start assembling the cards. After that you can change your cube however you like, but at least you know that you have a decent starting point. Building your own cube from scratch is a bit more daunting, but also a more interesting topic for a video, so that's what this one will be about. When you build your own cube, the first thing you need to know is that there really are no rules on how to do it. In this video I will show a framework for how you could build a cube, but that doesn't mean that that's how you should do it. You can make any pile of any size with any cards that you like and call it your cube. The most well-known cubes are the ones that you can draft on Magic Online. These cubes are usually named after the format that all the cards in the cube are legal in. They contain 540 or more of the most powerful cards, distributed evenly over the 5 colors with multicolor cards in all 10 two-color combinations, and the cubes support many different archetypes. On cubetutor.com you will find many cubes that are somewhat similar to these Magic Online cubes. Powerful cards, enough to draft with 8 people, with all colors and 2-color pairs evenly represented and with supported archetype across the spectrum of aggro, mid-range, control and combo. Later in this video I will dive deeper into how you could go about building just such a cube. But first let me reiterate that is not the only way to build one. As you will see when you browse through CubeTutor, there are many people with cubes that deviate from what seems to be the norm. There are no hard rules on cube building, and you should feel free to break any rules that you either impose upon yourself or that consensus seem to dictate. You don't need to make a cube by format. Your cube doesn't have to support a huge number of archetypes, and your cube doesn't need to be only Magic's most powerful cards. You can build a cube with only green commons, or one full of just bad cards to play backdraft with. You can build a cube with only 100 cards to use for a 2-person sealed deck or battle box. You can build a cube that focuses on the guild-packed planeswalkers, or one that focuses on monocolored tribal decks and excludes the color blue, or a commander cube with a separate draft pack with only legendary creatures to use as your commander. You can build a cube based on a specific plane like Ravnica or Innistrad. Many cubes are singleton, that's also a rule you can just let go of. You can build a color-shifted cube or an all-common cube, or one with only enchantments or only creatures or multicolored cards. Again, it's your cube, your rules. Before you decide what type of cube you want to make, you should answer the question, what is the purpose of my cube? If your goal is to get 6 or 8 people together to draft your cube regularly, it can be advisable to stick with a cube design that people are more familiar with. If you want to build something a bit more out there, then you might find it harder to convince people to come and draft your cube. But there may be other reasons for building a cube. Some cube designers get most of the pleasure from designing something novel and maybe discussing it on Reddit. Some people might want to build a small cube just for playing quick games with their significant other at the breakfast table. You could build a cube to use as a teaching tool, or to just whip out as an easy out-of-the-box Magic experience for when you realize that all players at your board game night are actually Magic players, and why play Catan if you can play Magic anyway? Well, once you know why and for whom you want to build your cube, you can then start verbalizing a set of rules. This could be very loose, like I want to make a cube with only the best green cards in Magic, or it can be more specific, like this. I want to make an all common and uncommon cube that focuses on the 5 3-color combinations known as shards and their mechanics from Alara block. It should be 360 cards from any modern legal Magic set. All cards should be singleton, except for the shards of Alara Trilands and Obelisks. Every pack should contain one of each of those. Really, any plan will do, but verbalizing a set of rules from the outset is a good idea, as long as you stay critical and ask yourself whether or not your rules actually make sense. And even if you find that they do, you might end up breaking them sooner or later anyway. As an example, let's go over that shards cube that I just described and see whether or not those restrictions are sensible and why you might want those. The first one is all commons and uncommons. Is this to keep the cost down? Or maybe to have a flat power level? Or maybe for drafts to feel more like normal limited? Then a focus on the 3-color shards and their mechanics from Alara block. Is this because you enjoyed Alara block limited very much? Or because they are good educational tools? Or because you want to focus on the 3-color combinations, but supporting all 10 is a bit daunting and you want to keep it simple for yourself and your players? The next one is cards from any modern legal Magic set. You might want to ask, why not from older sets or supplementary sets? Do you only want cards that you think your players are familiar with? Or maybe you only want cards with a new card frame for aesthetic reasons and you think that supplementary sets like Commander and Battle Bond are not really Magic cards? Or maybe you just want to narrow down your options because you feel overwhelmed. And then 360 cards. Is this because you want to draft a cube with 8 people maybe? And why not add more cards to prevent drafting to become repetitive or combos to become too easy to assemble? Do you prefer it when players always have access to all available cards in the cube? Or maybe you just have a box that exactly fits 360 cards? Then all cards need to be singleton. The reason for this is probably that that's what you and your players feel that a cube should be. Most cubes are singleton after all, and why would you deviate from that? But then, except for tri-lands and obelisks, and why would you make this exception? Is that because you want to make it easy for players to build a 3-color deck, and these lands are just the best ones available for that? And maybe the singleton rule is less important for mana fixing anyway? Sorry for this lengthy example of a pretty niche cube idea, but I wanted to illustrate that if you set yourself a bunch of rules, that you should also be able to verify that those rules actually make for a better cube experience, because that's in the end what it's all about. Once you have settled on a plan for your cube, it's time to make some card choices. This is the most fun part. Here are some groups of cards that you might want to consider. For your desired strategies to come out, you need to make sure that you have a good amount of enablers and some payoffs that make it worth playing those. For creature decks, you want the right creatures at each mana cost. If you want aggressive strategies like White Weenie to be viable, it's very important that players can draft a proper curve. You might want to add some combos to your cube. I made an episode on that topic specifically, so please check that one out for some ideas. You also want to add plenty of interactive cards to enable counterplay to the dominant strategies. Board sweepers can be an important part of this, but make sure that you don't have too many of those if you want creature strategies to have a fair shot. Many cubes have a lot of simply good cards that are not strategy specific. Players like cards that are flexible and powerful for their decks. Everyone loves a good mana base, so I suggest also always including a reasonable amount of multicolor lands and mana rocks. Later in this episode I will go a bit deeper into this specific subject. And last but not least, don't forget to add your own favorite Magic cards and the cards that you know that your friends will specifically enjoy. Nothing wrong with being a crowd pleaser. And the rest of your cube will consist mostly of bread and butter cards that make it all work together. Additional synergy cards, curve fillers, mana elves, tutor effects, combat tricks, burn spells, cantrip, utility lands, counterspells, spot removal, card draw, etc. For many types of effect, Magic has multiple viable options, and finding the right card is not always trivial. Even something as simple as choosing the green 2-drop mana creatures to add to your cube is an interesting decision. Are there tribal synergies to take into account? Are +1/+1 or -1/-1 counters relevant? Will the cube have fetch lands, or support energy, or have a strong multicolor theme? Or do you maybe have a pimped version of a certain card? Or do you prefer cards with the old card frame because of nostalgia? Trying to think about all the relevant factors when selecting cards can be a nice challenge and will eventually make your cube play that much better. Now that you've chosen your strategies and archetypes and have made an initial selection of cards, the next step is to make sure it all balances out in terms of colors and power level. This balancing act is a great puzzle and one that you can and should work on for as long as your cube exists. A tool that I have found useful in trying to solve this puzzle is to try and visualize your cube as a number of collections that each represent the core of a certain strategy or color combination. As an example, let's say I want to build a cube of 360 cards with mostly powerful or well-known cards that focuses on the 10 guilds, the 2 color pairs. We can then make 10 collections of around 36 cards each that represent what each guild is supposed to do in this cube. Let's first look at the collection for blue-green. For this cube, I want this combination to be about loosely building around Opposition, Birthing Pod and Tradewind Rider. I definitely want my 4 multicolor cards to work well with these 3 build-arounds, and after adding a few more high synergy cards, the core of this collection could look like this. filling it up with some less strategy specific cards like mana ramp, cantrips, counterspells, and of course the appropriate mana fixing, the full 36 card collection would then look like this. Let's look at Izzet next. I want blue-red to have a typical Spells Matter theme in this cube, with multiple build-arounds like Thing in the Ice, Arclight Phoenix, Young Pyromancer, etc. I will then add my multicolor cards and some other high synergy cards to arrive at this core collection, and the full collection could then look like this. You can see these collections a bit like the color boards used by interior designers to get a feel of what a room should look like. Laying out the collection for a color pair is almost, but not quite, like building the archetypical deck for that pair, because you consider things like a proper mana curve, the right mix of creatures and spells, and of course enough support for your themes. Looking at color pairs in this way gives you a clear view of how well your combos or synergies or build-arounds are supported. By nature, these collections are a bit light on bread and butter cards, because those are also spread across the other collections. The number of mana elves, for example, may look a bit light for the Simic collection, but those can also be found in the other 3 collections that include green. Of course, players drafting blue-green are not restricted to drafting only cards from their collection, but the collection shows you what, let's say, a pure green-blue deck might feel like in this cube. This cube example was pretty much a good stuff cube, but maybe you prefer strategies or themes to be a bit more clearly defined and linear. This will add an extra layer of complexity to the cube design, because you need to make sure that there's enough overlap between those very linear strategies to help players draft enough playables for their deck. If you have a linear theme in Simic, for example, but the blue and green cards in other collections have no synergy with those Simic cards, then options will dry up very quickly. A proven way to solve this is to add cards that can enable or at least be useful in multiple different archetypes. In the more synergy-based Magic sets, like the Master sets and Modern Horizons, you can see that the designers planted many of these so-called pivot cards to enable the more linear draft strategies. Pivot cards ensure that linear archetypes can have a critical mass of support, they allow drafters to stay open by picking flexible cards early, and they allow players to pivot during a draft, to change direction while still having previously drafted cards that can support the new different path. Let's see how this can be done in another 360 card example cube that is a little less powerful than the previous one, and in which each color pair is highly focused on a linear strategy. Simic here is all about +1/+1 counters, and this is what the blue-green collection might look like. As you see in this extreme example, every single card plays into the +1/+1 counter theme. But having only the cards in this collection care about counters may not be enough to support such a strong linear strategy. It would be nice if there were also blue and green cards in other collections to help out with this mechanic, and it would also be great if some of these +1/+1 counter payoffs were also useful in other color pairs. In this imaginary cube, green-white cares about making tokens and going wide. I could have Biogenic Ooze, Doubling Season, Nissa Voice of Zendikar and Assure Assemble in the Celestia collection to not only be good for this tokens deck, but also to help out Simic. Conversely, I could have Ajani, Adversary of Tyrants, Unbreakable Formation and Mikaeus the Lunarch to make the green payoffs for +1/+1 counters also relevant for the Celestia deck. In the same way, this cube could have support for the +1/+1 counter theme in the Gruul collection that cares mostly about power 5 or higher synergies, or in the Golgari collection that focuses mainly on graveyard stuff, and even in the collections for blue-red spells, black-red goblins and white-black aristocrats. You probably get the idea. To allow a linear theme to come out, you can focus your collection for that strategy almost entirely on it, and then sprinkle additional support across the other collections, all while keeping those other collections focused on their own archetype as well. If you're looking for help to find the right cards, I have found the Commander website edhrec.com to be extremely helpful to find the right cards that synergize with a certain strategy, or cards that synergize with multiple strategies. Also, the search engines Gatherer and Scryfall can be a great help in finding the cards you need. And of course, browsing through a bunch of cubes on CubeTutor can also help you find inspiration. Now let's have a quick look at color distributions. Though you can definitely make, for example, an all-green cube or a Grixis cube, Most cubes have a somewhat even distribution of 5 colors and the 10 color pairs. Here are those distributions for the latest version of the Magic Online Modern and Vintage cubes and the current distribution of my own cube. What immediately sets the Vintage cube apart is the much higher number of colorless cards. The reason for this is that it supports a heavy artifact theme and includes some powerful mana artifacts like Black Lotus and the 5 Moxen. Another quirk of this cube is that the monocolored cards aren't very fairly distributed at all, with red only having 66 cards, while blue has as many as 75, even 77 if you count Solarian Academy and Sheldog Isle. I included my own cube because it currently has a significantly higher percentage of multicolored cards than the Magic Online cubes. This may be a bit on the high side, but I haven't found it to be problematic, and I feel that you don't need to keep those numbers as low as the Magic Online cubes do. Keeping the number of multicolored cards limited is a good idea, but you don't have to count hybrid cards towards this limit. If you have a somewhat high number of multicolored cards in your cube, you can even partly offset this by also increasing the number of hybrid cards, because where regular multicolored cards are more restrictive as to who can play them, for hybrid cards the opposite is true. What these three distributions show is that you don't need to have exactly the same number of cards in every color to have a functional cube. Many cubes on CubeTutor have the numbers per color and color pair exactly even, but there's really no need for that, and having your colors somewhat balanced is just as good as absolutely balanced. Having said that, when you build a cube for the first time, I would start with an even distribution and then adjust if you feel the need to. Depending on the size of your cube, these example distributions are a reasonable starting point for non-powered cubes that represent the 5 colors and 10 color pairs evenly. Please take these numbers as a very general guideline though, and feel free to adjust them to your cube's unique demands. If you want your cube to support multicolored decks, you want to include some mana fixing in multicolor lands and artifacts that provide multiple colors of mana. The latest version of the Magic Online Legacy Cube has 64 mana fixing lands, I'm counting Field of Ruin here, out of a total of 600 cards. I believe that roughly 10% is a good ratio for multicolor lands in your cube. The 6 dual land cycles depicted here are probably the most popular ones, and ones that you'll see in many different cubes. If your cube has as many powerful cards as you can get your hands on, then you might as well include the best multicolor lands you own as well. The original dual lands from Alpha, Shock lands and Fetch lands are an obvious starting point for this. But don't worry if you don't own the original duals or even all the Fetch lands. There are many great land cycles that you can use, like the Pain lands, Scry lands, Filter lands and Cycling lands, and you could even make the case that all of these have more interesting gameplay than the Alpha duals. A nice thing about Pain lands and Filter lands, by the way, is that they allow you to include cards that require colorless mana in your cube, like Thought-Knot Seer and Reality Smasher. If you have a reason to lower the power level of your mana fixers, or if you have rarity restrictions on your cube, or you just don't want to spend too much money, then there are still plenty of options to choose from, though some of these land cycles are frustratingly bad. Lands like Cloudcrest Lake and Landgap are just annoying, and I don't recommend punishing your players with these terrible cards. Especially if you want to use only common or uncommon cards, you might just be better off by choosing one cycle of lands, for example the life gain tapped lands, and then be done with it. Using only guild gates in this way allows you also to have gate payoffs in your cube. The other important source of mana fixing are artifacts that provide multiple colors of mana. The Sickness are probably the best known cycle of multicolor mana rocks, and since Modern Horizons also the Talisman cycle is complete. The danger of including a full 10 of these in your cube is that you give high quality mana ramp that doubles as color fixing to all 5 colors, which might eat too much into green's slice of the color pie. I think it's generally better not to include a full cycle of Sickness because of that. The Talismans, by the way, also provide colorless mana, so they can, just like Pain lands and Filter lands, be an elegant way to support the aforementioned Eldrazi. Instead of the Sickness and Talismans, just adding a handful of the mana rocks in this list can do the trick as well. For Pauper or Peasant cubes, you can even look to the various cycles of 3 mana artifacts if the power level of the cube is low enough to make those relevant. So now you've defined a set of rules, chosen your archetypes, selected your favorite cards, decided on a rough color distribution, and have used collections to make sure it all works out, your cube is almost ready to go live. But that is not where the puzzle ends. A cube is not a static entity. Every time you draft a cube, you will learn new things. every set that gets released might have new cards that you want to try, and every person you discuss your cube with might give you new insights. So you will tinker and improve and discuss and debate, fiddle and change and number crunch to fit new combos and synergies in, and basically you set yourself up for a lifetime of fun. I said almost ready to go live because there are a few finishing touches to be made. First of all, if after drafting your cube there are always extra packs left, so this depends on the size of your cube, consider adding one or more lore seekers and maybe the sweet card booster tutor to your cube. There's a couple of other cards from the conspiracy and unsets that you might want to consider, but these two are easy crowd favorites. Secondly, make sure you have the right amount of basic lands ready. These should be sleeved and ready to go, and preferably not just a random bunch of lands that you found somewhere on the floor or in a bin. Show your cube the respect it deserves and select some handsome ones. I have found that around 30 of each type is enough for an 8-person draft. Then thirdly, if you have token makers in your cube, and it's very unlikely that you don't, try to gather all the relevant tokens beforehand. The play experience just gets much better if people have the right tokens handy. Then your cube should also always be sleeved. Nobody likes to draft with bare cards or just perfect fits, only to then have to sleeve their own deck. Make sure you have enough spare sleeves to replace ones that get damaged. You can save yourself some effort by crowdsourcing any sleeving or re-sleeving activities. And finally, you should find yourself a nice box that fits all your cards, tokens, basic lands and extra sleeves. Having everything that belongs to the cube in one place makes your life much easier, especially if you plan on moving your cube outside your home. Reddit user Eldrazi Lecky posted an extensive cube storage guide in the MTG Cube subreddit, so check that one out if you are looking for suggestions. And that does it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it or found it useful, and please feel free to share it with anyone planning to build their first cube. I feel that we have covered all the important basics here, but of course there are still plenty of cube subjects left to discuss, so please subscribe if you want to be notified if I release a video on them. If you have anything to add or feedback to give, please feel free to leave a comment. Thank you very much for making it all the way to the end, and I hope to see you next time.